PSD.
What is PSD? PSD is the file format for Photoshop something something. So it's just people who just only do work with Photoshop and can't do anything else. So who has the busiest finals week? Worst finals week?
I have a really bad, like, I have Monday, both of my finals, and it's like from 2 to 4, 6 to 8. Like there's a little bit, but like it's just gonna be a tough X amount of hours.
But,
no.
I'll need to time manage all of the forms on Wednesday.
How many papers?
3, 1 German, Spanish. All of my other classes have papers.
Except this one?
So, a lot of writing.
Yep.
Is this like a
Project's basically.
Yes, this is actually a good thing.
Who has the easiest finals week?
We only have one exam. I did my philosophy exam this week.
Okay.
It just says today. And I have a psychology paper due this Friday. And then after that, the computer science. So that's it. That's fine.
Yeah. Sounds pretty good to me.
Did they change the finals week schedule? Because my friend downloaded like our probability syllabus in the beginning, and it said our final was on next Friday, and he learned yesterday that it was actually next Monday.
Ooh, ouch.
What? The teacher didn't like talk about it?
No, I don't think so. He changed it on his syllabus, but I don't think he directly mentioned it. So, I was wondering if they changed the final schedule, like the CMC one.
Usually the final schedules are like set in stone years in advance. So.
Yeah. Wait, how do you meet? I feel like my teachers chose when they, like.
They're really weird times and things. But yeah, there's.
Like I have a final ending at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
I'm like.
Are you serious?
Yeah. I'm like, oh.
That's.
Wait, what is it? What do you have?
Oh, I said I have a final ending at 10 p.m.
That's nuts.
Because we have like 3-hour finals.
Right.
I think it's like.
Yeah, the other section, their final time would be going up until 10 p.m.
It's just so weird.
Yep. Okay, let's go ahead and get started for our last, hopefully mixed feelings, not all joy that it's last class, some sadness mixed in there.
Wait,
but
what day is it?
Today is our last class, yes. Well, so we'll still have the lab section on Friday like normal to you can work and ask questions and things, but no more material covered after today. And today our plan is mostly just to finish up this homework 5 and the Twitter clone project, the actual requirements for it. And then we'll end the whole class with a discussion on this thing called Sql injection, which I've been talking about for a little bit. But you'll need to be able to defend your Twitter clone against this Sql injection attack. And so we'll talk about what that is and how to do that. And that'll be our end of class. So for this Twitter clone, we've talked high level about it at different points. But the main thing that you'll want to be aware of is, again, the due date. So Friday of finals week, so December 17th. And it's posted an issue that has the exact details of what the due process is going to be like. So it's different than the other projects since you'll have to demo it in person over Zoom. And I've blocked out a 5-hour period in order to do this. I think our actual final schedule is something like 9 to 12. A handful of people have asked for being able to do it a little bit earlier because of flights and things like that. So I'll be there at 7 a.m. and you're welcome to log on to Zoom at that point. If for whatever reason the December 17th does not work for you, then you have two options. One is that you can schedule an alternative time with me before then, and we can go over it, and I'll give you your grade right then. Or if you don't think December 17th is enough time, then you can also have through the weekend, and we'll do it on Monday, and you'll just get the equivalent of a 1-day late penalty, even though it'll be 3 days late. So that 1-day late penalty, this assignment's worth 40 points, so that'll be an 8-point penalty. And so if, we'll talk about some of the extra ways to get extra points on this assignment. You just have to do a couple of those in order to make that up. So it'll be over Zoom, and the basic idea will be I'll be allowing just one person into the Zoom room at a time, and I'm going to ask for remote control permissions on your computer. I'll open up your website, click on all the buttons, type in things in all the login areas and whatnot. And basically, I'm going to do everything that I can to try to break your web page. And so you want to make your web page be robust and not something that I can break. And then I'll also give you your grade on the assignment and the final grade in the class right then. So if you have any questions about anything, you'll have a chance to ask about that. Another thing that's maybe, so it'll probably take about 5 minutes per student to do this. So this is not just for this section right here, but for the other section, there's 50 students total. So it's about like maybe 4 hours worth of time that it'll take me to meet with everybody. And so if you don't want to be just like waiting in the waiting room for forever, then you want to log in earlier. I'll just be going through the order that people log into Zoom in order to accept them into the meeting and work with you through your webpage. And also, if for whatever reason it takes longer than noon to do things, I'll be sticking around for however long it takes to get to everybody. Any questions about just the timing or scheduling of that, what the actual process of the submission and grading will look like? Okay. So back to the requirements. So we've talked a lot about the main objectives for this assignment so far. Again, I'll just highlight this CRUD acronym, create, read, update, delete. You'll hear people talking about CRUD applications all the time, and that's what they're referring to is basically these web applications that are using SQL in the background. And what I think is really the hardest part about this assignment is just there's so much going on with all these different programming languages that we're integrating together and having to remember like which tasks go along with which language and getting all those integrated together. Real world systems, so like Facebook, Google, Instagram, all those things, they probably have about 20 of these languages in their tech stack that people are working with and knowing. And basically nobody who works at those companies is going to know all 20 of those systems, 20 of those languages, but you'll still have to be working with quite a few, integrating them all together at any one point. So grading, 40 points in this assignment. 25 of those points are for required tasks, and then the remainder is up to you to decide how to get those points. And I have a huge number of optional tasks. So it's, if you completed all the optional tasks, you'd get an 80 out of 40. And you can basically get unlimited extra credit on this assignment. If there are there's other potential things that you might be interested in doing, and if you go ahead and do those, I will award what I think is an appropriate amount of extra credit for whatever other tasks you choose. Again, we haven't talked about this. Sql Injection Attack, we'll talk about that after going over this, the rubric here. But if you are subject to this, you'll get a negative 10-point penalty on the assignment. So it's not like negative 10 out of 40, that's just whatever. If you would have gotten 40 out of 40, you'd get 30 out of 40 instead. And again, when I'll be working with your web page, actually typing things in, and I don't want to say my goal because I hope I don't see any internal server errors, but I will be trying to get an internal server error to come up, and your all's job is to prevent those internal server errors from coming up. If that does come up on one of these tasks, then you won't get any points for that particular task. So the required tasks, there's 5 of them, 1 for each of the routes that you had to implement in the previous lab. So the previous lab was for the home route, the root route, that just lists all of the messages on the system. And so everybody should have this one done already. Then the login and logout routes we talked about last time in class. And so you might not have all that integrated together yet with your project, but you have all the code and all the techniques and things that you need for that. 2 more routes, the creating a user account and creating a message. These 2 routes will be very similar to your login route, how that works. That you'll have to create a form for each of those that has appropriate things inside of it for creating a new user account and creating a message. And then you'll have to do a SQL insert command when the person submits that form to insert the things into the database. You'll have to be a little bit careful with the creating a new user account, that if the user attempts to create an account that already exists, you don't want to overwrite the old account. So you'll have to have a check in there first. Similar to how we have some checks in the login route that don't insert things if the account already exists. But so yeah, we're not going to go over in detail how to do these 2 things right here, but you should have all of the techniques already for doing those. Are there any questions about what's being asked of you in these 2 routes here, like creating a message or creating a user account? Does that all make sense? Seems straightforward. See a couple head nods.
Do you want to just, you also need to store the user ID of that user who created the message. Is that displayed or stored?
Yeah, so under this create a message right here, it's talking about storing the user ID right here. And what that's referring to is that, so basically in create user accounts, you're adding something to the users table. In create a message, you're adding something to the messages table. But when you add something to the messages table, there's this sender ID column, and that sender ID has to correspond to something in the users table. And so this user ID of the user who's currently logged in comes from, or the user ID in the messages table comes from the user ID who's currently logged in. So storing it means that it gets inserted. Did that make sense? Did that answer the question? Yeah, I guess if I was to rank these in terms of difficulty, I would say this one, since this only involves the users table, this one's a little bit easier than this one, since messages will involve both the users and the messages table.
So is this sort of replicating what we did with the lab that was due today actually, or last night, where we had to like correspond the center ID with the user ID and user table?
Exactly, it's a good question. So the question is, how does this relate to the lab, last week's lab that was due yesterday? And so this home route is exactly the last week's lab. But then when you're doing the creating a message and you're having to look up the user ID from a particular username, that is also one of those steps in the lab. So yeah, you can basically just copy and paste that 10 lines of code to do that section right here.
Thanks.
Good question. Any other questions about any of the required tasks? What's expected? Eddie?
Sql injection attack. What can we learn?
So yeah, we haven't talked about the Sql injection attack yet. After we go over this, we'll do that. Yeah. So the optional tasks are divided into 3 categories based on sort of how difficult I think they are. The first category is worth 3 points each, and these don't require you to do like anything special at all with SQL. So it's just the standard select or potentially an insert or a delete, things that you've already seen and should hopefully know pretty well. Some of the, I guess, if I were to make a recommendation about things that I think are particularly easy ones, they're roughly ranked in order top to bottom of what I consider to be easiest to hardest. So creating a nicely themed web page with nice HTML and CSS. I think that should be pretty straightforward for compared to the other tasks, and it'll also make just working on the website a little bit more fun, having something pretty to look at. So I'd recommend doing that one. And then, yeah, again, I'll let you read through them if you want, but roughly ranked easiest to hardest. Maybe the deleting ones are also a pretty easy thing to do. The ones that are worth 6 points each, they require you doing something a little bit fancier with SQL somehow. It's all stuff that we've talked about, but still a little bit, just maybe a little bit harder. So things like you'll actually have to change what the columns in the tables are, or things like that. So I think my recommendation is do these if you want a challenge, but if you're just looking to maximize points, it's probably easier to do 2 of these tasks up here. 2 of these tasks is probably easier than 1 of these tasks. But the last one, which is worth 9 points, I also think is relatively easy and probably the easiest one in terms of the number of points that you get. And the goal of this task is to allow markdown formatting in your messages. So just like Reddit allows markdown formatting in its messages, you can add that to your Twitter clone here. Twitter doesn't actually allow markdown formatting. And the reason that I think that this would be relatively easy is because you've already implemented all the code for doing this in your homework 1 assignment that converted markdown to HTML. And so you'll have to just basically integrate that previous homework assignment into this homework assignment, and you can get the you'll get the credit. Any questions about any of those? Yes.
Just the markdown. Can you remind me like what the like why like the conversion of like the code to markdown is like useful? Like what would it be?
Yeah, so the question is about like what exactly, maybe what's the purpose of doing something like this? That if we were to, so again, like all of these README files that we're looking at that have our instructions, they're all written in Markdown. And so they have this sort of formatting like this. And with this last task, it would allow you to, or allow a user of your website to say create a list in their post just doing something like this. And then you would automatically convert that to appropriate HTML, and then it would get displayed nicely in their message when it's displayed on your website. If you were to, so I think the easiest way to get a full credit grade on this assignment is doing these first two tasks up here, plus this markdown task down here. But that would be 15 points of the, in total of the extra tasks, and so that would put you at 40 out of 40. Maybe a danger of doing that, though, is that if for some reason you don't get these points, then there's a good chance you won't get most of the points, or maybe any of the points. And so you might want to think about adding an extra couple of like backup tasks that you've completed. Okay.
Are you going to go over the HTML injection too?
Yeah, so the HTML injection and the Sql injection are the same basic idea. So yeah, you'll see what both of those are here in a minute.
Also, I know there's like on YouTube there are a ton of resources for this project. Are we allowed to like reference that, or should this be kind of just like something you do with like TAs and ourselves?
You're allowed in this class to use any resource that you want. So there's lots of good tutorials for building web pages with Flask, and so it's basically like you're working at a company and you've been assigned this task, and so anything is fair game that is not illegal. But I just want you to get the task completed. Yes, one of the references, if we were to go back here, and week 13, the references for SQL, where'd they go? Here we go, this advanced tutorial. If you were to work through the entirety of this advanced tutorial, then that would be an 80 out of 40. But basically the way that I got most of the extra credits is by its things that are implemented in this advanced tutorial here. But this advanced tutorial is also like a book length thing. It actually calls them all chapters. So you're welcome to work through them all. You're not required to work through them all. But if you did, that would be a 80 out of 40. Good question. Any other questions just about the mechanics of the assignment or anything other than the injection parts? Okay, so then we'll have our last new technical material today of Sql injection. And if we come over to over here, I've got our website loaded. And so we have notes section 1 looking at project.py. Haven't made any changes since Monday. And again, the stuff that was on Monday has been uploaded to GitHub. So if you didn't catch anything or missed a little bit, the final versions of all the files that we ended up with are up there. And again, after today, we won't make too many changes today, but I'll upload the changes that we do make to GitHub so that you can see them. And we'll start off, I'm just going to run, so Python 3, and then my project.py file, and then come over here to the Twitter clone, and let's just go to the base website here. And currently I am logged in, so let's log out, and then press on the login button over here. And let's just remind ourselves what we had done before, that if I were to do something like Trump and then type in a bad password, so that's not a good password, it says invalid username password. But if I type Trump and then I am Trump like this, then when I log in, it'll all work. let's see, just, we didn't do this last time, but maybe something cool that, that we should be aware of is, so here we have the username and password. I just right-clicked and went to the inspect element, and I can edit this, this HTML however I want to. And what I'm going to do is just change this type equals password to type equals text, so that temporarily we can see the values in here of this password field. So all I did was change this type, change it back to password, change it back to text. And so that makes it easier for us to display what's going on. Doesn't actually change the HTML though, that if I were to refresh this, it'd be back to password. But now this is the correct password, so when I log in, up here, there's no error messages displayed, and when I go to the home, it shows me as logged in. And the way that our website knows that we're logged in is under the storage tab, we have the cookies, and we have a username and password cookie. And when I press the logout button, it deletes those cookies, so we're not logged in anymore. So that's all what we did last time.
Wait, and if you logged out, deleted the cookies, and then tried to log in with anything, wouldn't it not have it? Or wouldn't it just like be invalid all the time?
So you're saying if I delete the cookies and then log in?
Yeah.
So the login over here,
Create a cookie. Yeah.
so like Trump, I am Trump, login, that does the creation of the cookies. The log out button automatically deleted the cookies for us. But if I were to just like manually delete one of these cookies or both of them and then reload this page, that also logs us out. Let's see. So back over here, we had all of this sort of debugging output that was helping us just figure out what's going on with all of our web pages. And so I recommend, as you're working on your web page, all the different routes, add a bunch of print statements in there just to make sure that things are, the values of variables are what you expect them to be. And especially anytime you have a SQL query, you can always print out that SQL query. So right now we only have one SQL query in this program. It's in this isValidLogin function, and it's right here. And so what I want us to do, what we're going to do next is we're going to go to the login field again, the login form, and we'll try to log in, and we'll see exactly what the SQL query is that comes down here. So back over here, let's log in as Trump, and I'll just do a bad password first, log in, get the invalid username password displayed. Coming back over here, we can see that here's the actual SQL query that, that we're running in the isValidLogin function. And so if we were to, say, open up Sqlite or just open up Python and run this SQL query again, we could reproduce these results and see that there are, in fact, no rows returned where the username equals Trump and the password equals 12. Are there any questions about how the SQL query relates to the login form that we were using? Again, whatever I put in as the username in the login form gets passed, substituted right here. So the username was Trump, and then the password was 12, so password is 12. Yes?
I have a question about the 404 error at the last line in the terminal. What is that from?
This right here, good question. So I'm going to go over to Firefox right over here, and we'll do right click and view page source. Let's make this a little bit bigger. So all of my web pages have a this header at the top, which has this link rel equals style sheet, and it's looking for this /static/style.css. And as part of your last lab, you were supposed to make your Python Flask app be able to deliver a CSS file, something like this. I have not done that in this particular set of code that we're working with right now. And so up here, when I do static / style.css, we get this 404 not found error. Take away the view source, the 404 not found. And so that's what's being displayed down here, is that we're trying to download this, but this doesn't exist. Did that make sense? Did that answer?
Yeah.
Good question. Any other questions before we get into the maybe mind-bending area of things?
If, no, that's a good question.
Okay, so back on our login route. Here it is. What I want us to do is, well, let's see. So we've tried some usernames and passwords, and we haven't been getting any internal server errors at this point. But what if an Irish person tried to log into our webpage? And there's a famous Irish last name of O'Hare. And Irish last names often have these single quotation marks inside of them. And so let's see what happens if Mr. O'Hare tries to log into our webpage like this and press login. And we get this internal server error. And so in order to figure out why we're getting this internal server error, I'm going to come back over here and look at the output down here. We have this Sqlite operational error. Anytime you have the Sqlite operational error, then you should be suspecting that the error is within SQL code and not within Python. Next, I'm going to look at the actual line that's causing this error. It says line 60. So this is line 60 right here. Again, anytime you have an error on a cursor.execute, you should be thinking that the error is within the SQL that's being passed to cursor.execute. And so in order to figure out why this SQL might have an error in it, let's actually look at the generated SQL. Up here, so here's my sort of formula for generating the SQL. But right here on line 58, I'm actually printing out what that SQL is after I substitute in that formula. So if I scroll up a little bit to right here, here's the actual SQL code, the actual SQL that's being substituted in. And if we look at this down here, this is the cause of the error message. That when we put in this username of O'Hare, then the O and the H, they have this apostrophe in between them. And so SQL thinks that the username should be O, and then it doesn't know what to do with this hair over here because of this apostrophe. And so one thing that I could do is I could do a string.username and then .replace. I want to replace all these single apostrophes with double apostrophes. Because we said in SQL, when you encounter a double apostrophe inside of a string, then that's going to make it, the technical term is that escapes the apostrophe, so you can actually use that apostrophe. Save this, come back here, Control C, up arrow, run this, back over to my login route. Let's visit the login route. Let's once again type in O'Hare, something as the password, login, and now we don't have this internal server error. I'm going to come back over here, look at the SQL code, and down here you can see that that single apostrophe was replaced by a double apostrophe right here. So we've successfully escaped that apostrophe, no longer getting an error message. Are there any questions about what this did right here, how that solves the internal server error? Eddie?
So basically, you replace the one single apostrophe, sorry, quotation mark, with single quotation mark of two of them.
Exactly, replaced a one quotation mark with two quotation marks.
What does it do again? It's just basically indicating that there's one quotation mark within the string.
Exactly, a single in SQL, this right here, this is interpreted as O''hair. Similar to how in Python, if we have a string that's like O'Hare like this, in Python, in order to make that work with single quotation marks, we put a backslash in front of it to escape this quotation mark to tell Python that it is in fact just a quotation mark here. In SQL, the way we do that is by putting 2 quotation marks next to each other.
So in SQL, 2 quotation marks are equal to 1 single quotation mark.
Yes. Yep. So, yes, question.
It's the same logic applied to the password.
Yeah, and so the question is now, what about the password? And so let's come back over to our login. And so let's now try using a username of Trump. Let's do, I'm gonna inspect this element again and make it text so that we can see, everybody can see what this text is. And what if I make the password of, has a quotation, single quotes, like this. Now I'm gonna try to log in. I'll get that internal server error because down here, we're getting the Sqlite 3 operational error. The error is happening on a cur.execute line. Both of these together makes me suspect that the error message is happening inside of SQL and not inside of Python. I look at line 60 in my project.py file, line 60 right here, and then scroll up to the actual SQL that's being generated, and you can see that it has just a single quotation mark like this inside of it. So yes, so right now, the way the password is by itself, we're just going to get a, we're going to get this error message. Before we try to fix this error message with password though, I want to see something maybe a little bit surprising that we can do with this. So are there any questions at this point about just like why this is the SQL that we're getting or why this SQL is causing an error message? Okay, so the surprising and I even want to say spectacular thing that we can do is inside of the password field, now somebody can actually insert new SQL commands. So I'm going to type something in and then we'll walk through and see exactly what happened. So let's press back. Over here, we can still see our password right here, still visible. I'm going to do a single quotation mark like this, and then I'm going to say, or that equals that. So this is my magic incantation right here of single quotation mark, or these are both single quotation marks equals a single quotation mark. And press login. And actually, we don't get any error messages. And in fact, we don't get an error saying that we're unsuccessfully logged in. We have, in fact, successfully logged in as Trump with our password being quotation mark or quotation quotation equals quotation. And in fact, this password will let us log in as any user we want right now. So we can log in as Biden, log in, no error message up here. If we come look at our storage, we can see our username has been set to Biden, and this is what our password is. And if we come back over and take a close look at the SQL that's being generated, this is the SQL that's being generated. It says where username equals Biden and password equals. So this whole thing right here is what I typed into the password field. That corresponds to this right here. So the thing that I have highlighted down below is exactly the same thing as the thing that I have highlighted up above. I've just sort of architected the password that I typed in a special way so that it would be valid SQL after it got inserted down here. And what's getting, how SQL is interpreting this is, so if username equals Biden and the password is empty, or just empty quotation equals empty quotation. This always evaluates to true. So this or statement is always going to evaluate to true. So this whole thing over here is going to evaluate to true. And it's going to get us all of the results in the database. When we have our if statement down here, we said if we had no rows returned, then we don't log in successfully. But if we do have rows returned, then we do in fact log in successfully. So this statement right here is causing us to get rows returned, causing us to be logged in successfully.
So does that mean you can technically do the percentage in SQL? That would give you like, because remember when SQL, when you put the percentage of any letter, it would give you like if the content contains this letter, then it's true. So couldn't you technically use a percent A, B, C, D, E, F, or say percent A, and it would give you, it would log in for any password that contains the letter A?
Yeah, so it's a great thought. So over here, when we have our password now, if I did something like Trump, and if we did something like %A%, so let's go ahead, just make sure that we can all see what's being typed in right here. So %A% and log in. That does not give me an error message because there's no quotation mark inside of it. Here's the resulting SQL down here. And in this case, when we say password equals, the equals requires an exact match right here. But if this was a password like, then it would be then it would match any password that contains an A. We can actually make this. We can actually make that work by doing something like, so here's our Trump, and then spec element text that, or password like %A%, login, and now that gives us a successful login. Here's our resulting SQL code down here. Password equals the empty string, which it's probably not, or password is like this, just contains an A somewhere inside of it. And the Trump password was I am Trump, so it does contain an A inside of it, so this evaluates to true again, and it successfully logs us in. So there's lots of different sort of SQL code right here that we could type in, and it's going to give us this behavior that is probably not what we intended. This is the Sql injection attack. So let's type it up here. When someone is able to enter SQL into the variables, so in this case, username, password, and change the behavior of the SQL statement, that's SQL injection. It's called injection because somebody is injecting new code into your program. They're inside of this password field, they're typing out new code, new SQL code, and injecting it into your program, making your program run code that you did not intend it to run. Yes.
Can you go over once more why doing the single quotation or double quotation equals single quotation, why that does end up returning rows?
Question is go over basically what this is doing.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is let's open up our create database file from before, gb create. And down here, when we were creating our, inserting things into our database, we had these strings like I'm a baby that we're inserting in. And this I'm a baby, in order to make I'm a baby actually like valid, I can't type I'm a baby like this because now SQL ends the quotation marks right here. In Python, I could do this with double quotes, but double quotes are not allowed in SQL. So this does not work in SQL. And so in SQL, in order to like actually tell SQL that I do in fact want a quotation mark here and not the end of the string, you have to do a double quote. So double quotes mean single quote in SQL. If I come back down here, do the Sqlite 3 of my twitterclone.db, select star from messages, you'll see that all of these I'm a baby have just the single quote inside of them because I have the double quotes here. So the purpose of doing this dot replace right here is to find any time where the user on the web page inserted a single quotation mark and replace it with a double quotation mark. Because that to SQL means actually it's actually a quotation mark. Did that help?
Why does that mean then that all of the passwords get returned? Because aren't you? I mean, even if you've changed some quotes around, aren't the passwords still not matching anything in the database?
Yeah. So let's come back over here. Let's do Trump and logging and changing this to text, quotation mark or quotation equals like that. Log in. Here's the SQL code that's being generated from that particular password. I'm gonna copy and paste it up here so that we can type with it a little bit. This is evaluated in SQL like this. It puts the parentheses from left to right. So this thing over here is going to be false because that's just not Trump's password. And then, or quotation mark equals quotation mark. This thing over here is always going to be true. And so this whole thing over here evaluates to true. And so it's just select username and password from users. And so it's going to get all the usernames and passwords. And then down here, based on how I have this set up, that means that it's going to return true. Yeah, so again, this is the Sql injection attack. This is the by far the most common attack that happens on web pages. So especially back in the 1990s and early 2000s, it was pretty much a guarantee that every web page you visited was vulnerable to SQL injection attacks like this. Nowadays, so every web development course always includes some sort of discussion about SQL injection. So they're a lot more rare now than they used to be, but they're still pretty common. And so we've seen sort of one way of mitigating these SQL injection attacks. So mitigating the attack means making it less likely to happen by just doing this replacement right here. It turns out, though, that there's a lot of features in SQL that we haven't talked about, and so this is not enough. I'll do it right here. The dot replace strategy is not enough to protect you from SQL injection. In order to actually protect you from SQL injection, we're going to change this SQL command just slightly. And so we'll comment out all of that and recreate a new command down here. Start by copy and pasting. And then here, where previously I was doing the Python string operations, I'm just going to replace that with a question mark. And down here, replace this with a question mark. Say username equals question mark, password equals question mark. The question mark just means this is something that we don't know what it is yet, but it's going to be substituted later. So again, the double dash means it's a comment. Question mark means we don't know the value, but it'll come later. Then we'll create our cursor like we did before, and cursor.execute SQL. And this is where we specify what the question marks are equal to. This cursor.execute has a second parameter that you can pass to it, which needs to be a list. And this list is all the variables that get substituted into the quotation marks. So username and password. The first thing in the list will get inserted in the first question mark. The second thing in the list will get substituted in the second question mark. And actually, I'm not sure how this question mark in a comment is going to behave. So I'm just going to be safe and move that out here as a Python comment. So username gets substituted here, password gets substituted here, and the cursor.execute function has built in inside of it all of the things that need to happen in order to actually correctly make the SQL code come out to be what you want it to be. So we'll save that, come down here, Control-C, up arrow, run that over here, reload our login page. Now I'll type O'Hare right here, and we just get the invalid username password because O'Hare doesn't exist in our database. And if I did something like Trump, and then down here, let's make it so that we can see the password, text, quotation mark, or quote equals quote like this, login. It's not letting me log in because it's an invalid username or password. But if I were to do Trump and I am Trump, then it is successfully letting me log in. So if the discussion on like exactly how the SQL injection attacks worked or didn't work didn't fully make sense, that's okay. The takeaway is that anytime you want to substitute a variable into SQL, you can do this, and then you won't have a SQL injection attack in your code.
You mentioned takes the username and the password from a list. What list is it taking it from? Like, we haven't defined
There's a list right here. So this list is the second parameter to execute. The first entry in the list is that. The second entry is that. We could also say like parameters equals username, password, and pass that in as param. Either way, those two things are going to be equivalent.
variables. Just the username and password is variables.
Oh yeah, and the username and the password, they came from being passed into the actual function. So the username and the password were things that we were previously using Python to try to construct our SQL query for us, but now we're using this execute to do it for us sort of automatically. Yes. So the question then is, what's exactly is the difference between the SQL injection versus the HTML injection? And in the HTML injection, so I'm not going to explicitly tell you how to overcome it, but in the link, the core, where did it go? Down here, the basic idea is that if somebody were to type in HTML as a message, we don't want that HTML to actually get displayed. And by default, Jinja Jinja automatically guarantees that HTML injection cannot happen. In order for you to do this extra credit, you'll have to turn off Jinja's HTML injection, which this Stack Overflow link tells you how to do that safely in order to only allow particular HTML tags inside. Good questions. Any other questions about, I guess again, the takeaway is that for all of your SQL commands, in this class, you're able to do everything just with these like question marks and passing it in through the execute. Turns out there are some situations where you can't do that and you actually have to use Python to build up your SQL string for you manually, and you have to be very careful when you do that. But for this class, all we're doing is setting variables equal to values inside of the SQL commands, and so you can use the question mark syntax and pass it in.
Question mark syntax, because then could you then go to like parameters and then user dot like replace and then just like create more string for doing that?
You're saying something like this. So you could do that, but there's no need to do that.
Yeah, but when in the cases in which you need more string, you were just saying.
Oh, so a case where you might need to build this manually is that if it was sometimes you were selecting from a users table, sometimes you were selecting from the messages table, then that would be, you'd have to have Python code that would build up the SQL. This question mark only works inside of the where clause, like username equals question mark.
Okay.
So if it was anything else that you had to do, maybe it's like, sometimes we want the username column, sometimes we want a different column. That doesn't work with the question mark. The only time the question mark's actually able to be used is inside of the where, setting a variable equal to a question mark. But that's all that you'll need to do for this class.
Okay.
Any other questions about anything related to the assignment? Eddie?
Why does it automatically detect the quotation mark?
So when we were using this strategy up here,
Right, yeah, well, before that, yes, we could just use, well, replace one quotation mark with two quotations, no quotation marks. But how did it just automatically do that by adding that correctly?
so this inside of the cursor.execute function, this is part of the Sqlite 3 library, and in that library they automatically do this replace for us, and they do a couple of other things that are needed for like weird foreign language situations and other things. So this is just, it would be possible for us to manually do that ourselves each time, but this is the guaranteed and easier way to do it. Okay, any other questions? So I mentioned that there's going to be, well, let's see. So in this comic's come up a number of times, but over here, you can see in this comment, or in this comic, they have some SQL, like a person's name is Robert, quotation mark, parentheses, semicolon. So that's the end of whatever the previous SQL statement is. And then the next SQL statement is drop table students. Drop is the same as delete everything from this table. So anytime somebody at this person's school typed their username into the database, it actually deleted everything from the database. And it turns out there are a number of people with actual names like this and companies with actual names like this. And so code needs to be able to handle these situations.
I know you mentioned that like you used to do the thing where you would destroy a laptop and then get the SQL data off of it. Are you able to, like, would the school be able to recover the student records by doing this?
So the question is, could a school recover the data after something like this? The answer is possibly, if you hired somebody for around $10,000 an hour of work to do it, and then maybe there's like a 50% chance.
How many hours?
It depends. At least a full day's worth of work.
24?
Basically, they'll charge whatever they think the school can pay. Yeah.
Me? Oh.
If it were my own data, then I would go through and do that. But it's enough of a pain that there's no amount of money that could make me want to do that for somebody else. So there's an optional lab this week. You don't have to do it, but if you do, you get 5 points of extra credit. And the idea of this lab is that, so Stripe, famous company that handles credit card payments. They handle several $1 billion a year in credit card payments over the internet. And they have a system called Capture the Flags. If you've watched the Mr. Robot season, Capture the Flags have come up there, and in some of the other videos a handful of times. But Stripe runs a Capture the Flag program. And the idea is that they have a website that they put up, and they want you to try to break into it. And there's one of their, so they have a lot of these that they've run. They all use different sort of techniques. But level 3 from their 2012 Capture the Flag uses Flask and has a Sql injection vulnerability inside of it. So you know everything that you need to do in order to break into this particular Capture the Flag level. And so if you just basically go to their level 3 and follow the instructions and do that, then the Bob user is who you have to log in as, and it will give you the password information to move on to the next level. But if you do this, then you'll get the 5 points of extra credits. This does require like actually showing to me and explaining to me in person how the SQL injection works. So you could do that, either set up an appointment or do that during the normal like final homework presentation. It just takes a minute or so to explain. Any questions about that? Then quick end of class, last few remarks. So main takeaways from this class, if you take away nothing else, hackers don't break things, they build things. And the hacker mantra is that laziness is good, boredom is evil. And so we automate the boring stuff. And that is like the fundamental goal of all hackers everywhere. Again, if we go back to the course webpage, everybody at Facebook considers themselves hackers. It's at One Hacker Way is where Facebook headquarters is located, because people at Facebook, they build things, and that's what hackers do. And hackers also get paid a lot of money. And so 2 reasons for that. First one is what they do is hard. One of the things that you've probably noticed in this class is that if your code isn't basically perfect, then it's just not working at all. And so if you imagine like all of the code in Facebook, there are hundreds of millions of lines of code that Facebook is using every time you connect to them. All of that code needs to be basically perfect. And so the people who write that code get paid a lot of money to do it. But it's also, I don't know, maybe you think it's too hard, but hopefully it hasn't been too hard in this course. That I think seeing a lot of growth from all of you about how your programming skills. And I think if you were wanting to put in the effort, then anybody here putting in enough effort could get one of these pay me a lot of money sort of jobs. Just as a reminder, so L3 at Google is like the entry level, straight out of college, making $190,000 a year. Let's see, I think L8 is the highest one that they have salary information for. They're getting paid $1 million a year for a typical L8 employee. And then it's the similar for Facebook, Microsoft, all these other companies. So that's the first reason. But the other reason is what hackers do, what people at Facebook and Google and Microsoft, what they do affects everything in society. So like, I mean, web pages are important. That was maybe obvious, but maybe less obvious was that you can monitor foreign governments with these tools, like we've been doing in the lab, seeing how many computers in North Korea are connected to the internet, scraping web pages for business information, like getting all the prices on eBay for everything that matches whatever your criteria are, or making cool visualizations like we did in homework 2. And we haven't spent too much time in this class about like the idea of Unicode and making our code work for not just English speakers, but for everybody else. But that's something that we also have to consider if you're a company like Facebook. And then good hackers, so good as in high quality, not good as in like morally righteous. They know how to break stuff. And so that's how maybe the derogatory word of hacking, where it comes from. But it's because the reason they know how to break stuff is because if you want to make your web pages immune to these SQL injection vulnerabilities, all these different attacks, you have to know how to do them in order to prevent them. So the SQL injection, the idea is to always validate your inputs. So validate is converting those single quotation marks into double quotation marks, making sure that you don't have input that's going to break your web page. We've talked about password cracking and getting good passwords, that it's basically just a for loop to try millions of different passwords. So you want to use good passwords and not reuse your passwords between sensitive accounts. And we also talked about these fake news bots, and they're actually like not too hard to create. One of the main takeaways of that assignment, though, is that if you really want to have a good defense, maybe a legal defense, you'll have to really understand how bots work, so that you understand how the good bots work, so you don't make those illegal as well. So in the assignment for the homework 4, there was a link to a number of bots, but Reddit encourages people to make bots that do different things, like filter out spam on certain subreddits, or there was the bots that if you post like an image or a GIF, it'll stabilize it for you, or bots that will like automatically copy information from Wikipedia that's relevant to what people are talking about. So different sort of bots like that. Reddit and all of these social media sites would not function without those good bots. So we did not talk about like distinguishing between the fake or the good and the bad bots. But if you go on to take the data mining course, that's one of the main things that we'll cover, is how to actually use different machine learning tools and things like that to separate out the good from the bad. And maybe the last thing is that, so all of these things, like they require some technical knowledge to be able to talk about them. And so if you ever see people talking about computer security, but they don't know how to code, that's just like a instant sign that they're a fraud. And this is basically applies to everybody who works in government or defense on computer security. For whatever reason, I have yet to meet somebody in those fields who I would consider competent. Maybe a motivation or a reason why that's the case is if you compare salaries at like Google, we just saw that like somebody who's experienced senior at Google working at this L8 level, they're getting paid $1 million a year to work at Google. The most you can get paid in the federal government as like the head of everybody in the federal government is like $100,000 a year. A little bit more than that, depending on where you live, but the pay is just not even remotely comparable. And so almost all of the high qualified people go into private sector working at companies like Google. Hope to see you all in future CS classes, and I would love to see you all again. If it doesn't work for your schedule or for whatever other reason, I will not be offended, but I will be excited if I do see you. Anybody have any last questions about anything, or? Really?
I have no.
Okay. If you have any sort of one-on-one question or code, about code or something, I'll be available after class during office hours. And maybe before you all pack up, though, if you haven't filled out the class survey, I'd encourage you to do that. The survey does help me in terms of adjusting things for future courses, especially the free response things at the end. If there's anything that you think like worked particularly well or not particularly well, then please let me know there. Yeah, I think I'm not supposed to technically be in the room while you all are working on that, so I'll head up to my office now. And if you do have any other questions about anything, I'll be happy to take them up there. Yeah, question? Question is where to find the survey. You should have gotten an email about it.
Even like course evaluation stuff, like
Yeah, if you,
somebody holler.
Peer evaluation.